Hello, this is Amber Chester and Daniel Castillo, and we will be interviewing Miss Helga King.
I was born February the 12th, 1930. Well, part of my life, 30 years of my life, I lived in Germany, in Essen. That's E-S-S-E-N, Essen. It's a big city. And since I was 30, I came to America in 1959.
How did you get to America?
Well, I flew over here and I married my husband in Germany and came over.
What's your husband's name?
Fred.
Okay. Where did you live when you came over here?
Well, first we lived in, my husband was in the army, of course, and we lived in Washington, D.C. And then we moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina, Fort Bragg. And my husband retired from Fort Bragg, out of Fort Bragg, after 20 years.
What jobs have you had here?
Well, I have, my husband and I have owned a flower shop. We have owned 5 restaurants, and I have been a dental hygienist. That's my real profession, dental hygiene.
Back to Germany, who did you live with?
I lived with my parents. In Germany, the living spaces are not very great, and we lived with my parents.
Okay. Did you have any brothers or sisters or anything?
Yes, I had one sister, and she passed away.
What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my mother in her younger years owned a beauty shop, and my father was an engineer in a big coal mine. This was before the war.
What do you remember from the war? Like any battles?
Well, the air raids, I remember quite well. I was 9 years when the war started, and 15 when it was over. And being a big city as it was, and very much industry, 99% of the city was destroyed. And I remember that vividly, running to bunkers and trying to survive.
What was it like? Like, could you get food? Was it hard
No,
to get
food was rationed very severely. I mean, our food was measured in grams, and towards the end, or even in the middle of the war, people would go to outside of the city to farmers, and if they had anything like silver or anything of value, they would trade it in for food. It was very difficult to get food.
Do you have any?
Could you go into a little bit of detail of how the city looked before and after the war?
Well, before, of course, everything was wonderful. You know, I mean, and of course Hitler, I don't know if you young people remember Hitler. He was in the government, running the government, and it wasn't very easy. You had to be very careful what you said. We had one radio station, and that was a government radio station. And we didn't know what was going on outside of Germany because we had no news media to present that to us. And I can remember Essen isn't far from England, and my father would sit in front of the radio and listen to BBC. And that was hard to get. And when you got it, it started out with a sound like beep, beep, beep. And my mother would beg him to turn it off, because if you were reported that you were listening to that, you would, face a penalty, a bad penalty. And you couldn't trust your neighbors, everybody was afraid of the government. And before they would, keep something to themselves, they would turn you in. Does that answer your question?
Yes, very well.
And then, you asked me about, afterwards, you could literally see from one side to the other, it was just all destroyed. There was a big company there that made, tanks, ammunition, cannons and all that. And they drew, of course, the air raids They had to be destroyed. And it was pretty much leveled. There was no transportation or mail or anything.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you go to school during this time?
Well, until the air raids got so bad. After that, when they got real bad, there were no schools. And in 1943, Hitler made all the mothers and children leave the big cities. And we were evacuated to the south of Germany, where there was no industry. And then, of course, school resumed, you know. So we missed several years during the war of schooling.
Did your parents still go to work before you moved down south?
Well, my father worked whenever possible, you know, whenever there were no air raids. I mean, it was a day and night thing. I mean, there were air raids all the time. And for a while, in the beginning of the war, we lived in the basement. We had moved our bedrooms into the basement. We lived in the basement. And then they got so bad where our house wasn't safe. In fact, our house got partially burned. Hitler, the government, had built bunkers in the cities, you know, for each section they had a bunker, and you could run to that if you were lucky, because there were no sirens anymore. The way you knew that there was going to be an air raid, the airplanes, when they flew over, they made a sound that sounded like
the humming sounded like when you hear an airplane go
yeah,
by.
yeah, and you knew then there was going to be an air raid. Then you would grab a little suitcase with documents that you had, and you would start running. And oftentimes you didn't quite get there, you know. You just had to wait it out. But
So did you stay in your basement, or did you go to the bunker?
well, just until it got real bad, we stayed in the basement. Then we started going to the bunker because it wasn't safe anymore. The air raids got so heavy, you know, that it wouldn't have been safe to stay in our house.
Do you remember, like, when America entered the war or anything? Like
Yes, when the Americans moved in, the troops, we lived in a small town in the southern part. And we had been told the Americans are coming, they're on the way, and you all better find shelter. And there was a big, huge root cellar. And this little town, all the people went into the root cellar. And we could hear the tanks going above us on the road. And we knew they were there. And it wasn't much later, and 3 American soldiers broke the door open and came in. And needless to say, we had been told all kinds of bad things about the Americans, you know. We thought we were in danger, but we weren't. They came in and they spoke perfect German, all 3 of them. And they said we did not need to be afraid, that we could go home, but that there was a curfew. You know, we had to be in at a certain time. I think it was 6 o'clock at night. And they were very kind, very nice. In fact, they fed this little village, you know. They had a big buffet-like setup, and we really feasted out, had good food, you know. And that was the end of the war.
Did you go back home after?
No, my father was 45 years old just before the war ended and got drafted. And then he got to be a prisoner of war, and we didn't even know where he was. So we stayed down there, and he came home 3 years later. They let him go. And he was 48 then. You know, he was just really an old man to be a soldier. And he came, and he wanted to get us, but we were kind of settled down there, and he stayed down there. We all stayed in the south, which is a lovely, lovely area, the southern part of Germany.
So did life go back to normal after that?
Well, yeah, you know, it never goes back to normal. You know, we had lost our home and our friends, and we had lost people that dear friends, like real friends next to us that were killed in air raids. It's something that, it doesn't become what it was before, It was not as happy.
So you just stayed in Germany until you were 30? What did you
I stayed in Germany until I met Fred, and we got married. And my mother passed away at that time, shortly after we got married. And my sister was already over here. She had married a soldier. And I brought my father with me over here because I didn't want him to be alone. And we came to America in 1959.
How did it feel to become American?
Well, it felt wonderful. I have something that bothers me deeply, and that is what my country did to the Jews. And I don't know if you all have heard of the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
And I could never understand that people could do such a thing. And I was glad to come here. And I've been happy here.
So you lived in Washington, D.C.?
We lived for a while in Washington, D.C., and then Fred got transferred to Fort Bragg in Fayetteville. And after 20 years of Army, he retired, and we moved here to Caldwell County. And I just liked it. I liked the mountains. I'm a mountain person, and I like mountains. And it was quiet here and peaceful, and we settled here.
What was it like living there?
Well, it was kind of exciting. We came here and we moved to Beach Mountain. I fell in love with Beach Mountain. And we bought a home there, and Fred and I got a job at the Holiday Inn in Van Elk, and Fred was the food and beverage director, and I was running the dining room. And we lived there for 2 or 3 years, I believe. And then our children got older and were in high school, and it was difficult to get up and down from the mountain to Watauga High School. And we moved down, and then Fred got his job as a evening director at Mainland Technical College, and I got the job as a dental hygienist. And I worked for state. I had 3 counties that I worked in, A.B., Yancey, and Mitchell County. And we stayed there a while, and then we bought the restaurants here. Of course, for a while we drove up and down from Lenore to Beach Mountain, and that got to be stressful. So we bought our home here and stayed in Caldwell County and had those restaurants.
What restaurants?
We had the Alpine Inn here in Lenore, in the mall. They were all in the mall. And then we had the hot dog stand in Lenore. There was a hot dog stand. And then I had a German gift shop in the mall here. And then we had an Orange Julius in Hickory, in the little mall. And then we had an Orange Julius in the mall in Gastonia, and another fast food place in the mall also, which was called Breakaway. And our boys then were out of high school, and each of them worked one, and Fred was between all of them all the time, and to check on management and all that. So we were pretty busy when we had the restaurants.
Do you have any stories from Beach Mountain?
Anyway.
Stories?
No, well, it was awfully snowy in winter, I mean, it was just, we had to, put things up by the window and by the door where the wind would blow it in. Beach Mountain was lovely to work there. At the time when we moved, they had the Wizard of Oz up there, and you could, ride up, and the whole story was presented, up there on the mountain. It was very lovely up there.
Caldwell County, how old were your boys then?
When we came to Caldwell County, Fred was already out of high school, and Terry had 1 year left in Watauga. So what would they have been?
They fled in 17.
Yeah, somewhere in that area. Terry maybe a little bit younger and Freddie a little older.
What did you have them at? Up in Beach Mountain or Washington or where?
What?
What did you have them at? Like, deliver them.
I had Freddie in Walter Reed in Washington, and Terry in Fort Bragg, in the hospital, in the Army hospital, both Army hospitals. Yeah.
What was it like him being in the Army and living on bases and stuff?
Well, it was exciting. Fortunately, Fred did not get transferred too many times. The family didn't move too much. But Fred went to Vietnam 1 year, and 1 year to Korea, so we were both times, the boys and I, alone, you know. And that wasn't very pleasant.
How did you raise them by yourself for those couple of years?
Well, Terry would tell you with the belt.
And he has.
Huh?
And he has.
Yeah. They
Was,
were manageable, you know. I didn't have a problem with them.
was it hard being by yourself with them?
Yes, it seems that when you're by yourself, when your husband is gone, something always happens. They break bones, or, you know, they were playing football, of course. But we managed. We did well. Unfortunately, Fred came home safe, you know. He got wounded, but he made it home.
What made you stay in Caldwell County?
Well, I don't know. Fred retired from the Army. We had the restaurants, and when we sold all the restaurants, he was asked to be the tax administrator for Caldwell County. And that was a 12 or 14 year job. And I got a job as a hygienist with a very nice dentist. And, you know, we enjoyed living here. Things were going well.
So why did you sell the businesses?
Well, the boys got tired of it, as is always the story when you have children in your business. They thought it was too much work, and they got better jobs. And here were Fred and I alone with 5 restaurants, and Fred was already always on the road. And I just thought that we needed to get out, and that's when he got a good job offer, and I got a job offer as a hygienist. And that was, you know, much more palatable than running restaurants, you know. So we just sold it all.
Do you have any stories that you can tell us?
About what?
It could be of Germany when you were a little girl before the war. Anything at that point, possibly when you came to America, what you first thought when you came to America. Do you have any stories, any wild or crazy stories you might think about?
Well, you know, of course, when I was little, there was no wildlife. Our upbringing was very lovingly controlled. Life before the war was pleasant if you didn't get yourself in trouble with the government. My father had a very nice income, and we had a nice home. And then after the war, during the war, that was horrible. The government changed, you know. Things got much more controlled, you know. The government controlled the people, and then they started that with the Jews, and we had friends. I had friends in school that I grew up with, and suddenly they were gone. And if you asked the teacher, where were they? Well, they moved. Well, they didn't move. They were taken to the concentration camp, you know, which we didn't know. Nobody would talk about it for fear. If you talked about it and criticized it, then you would end up in concentration camp too. So nobody talked about it, so it wasn't well known to the people what was really going on. And that was a horrible time. And then it would be hard for you all to believe that a mode of greeting. You say, "Hi, how are you?" You know, we couldn't say that. Even a neighbor, if I would have walked out of here and my neighbor was down there, I would have had to say Heil Hitler. Raise my hand, say Heil Hitler. And if you didn't do that, if the neighbor was ugly and reported you, then you were in trouble. So that was the mode of greeting, Heil Hitler, you know. I mean, just things like that, you know, that were horrible, you know. I mean, there was no freedom. There was no freedom. And when I came to America, and then too over there, if you moved, you had to go to the police department where you lived, tell them where you moved to, and then when you got to where you were going to move to, you had to go to that police department and tell them that you had arrived, that that's where you live now. So they had a control of you at all times.
Did you have a curfew then? You had to be in at a certain time and you couldn't come out till
No. After the war, that it was democratic, you know. I mean, it was, no. But that still held true. Like when I came to America, I had to go to the police department there and tell them that I was going to America, you know. They always wanted to know where you are, you know. I don't know if that was good for the country or not, but that's the way it was, you know. You had no freedom, and when I came to...
Okay. When did you find out that Jews were being taken to concentration camps and stuff?
Well, I personally, you know, see, I was just a child, but I don't really know how soon my parents would have known. But I had an uncle, and he was in the army, also 40-some years old. This is towards the end. And suddenly he was gone and nobody knew where he was. And when he came back, he told us what had happened. They had made him a guard at a concentration camp and he couldn't take it. What was going on there, he couldn't take it. So he volunteered for the Russian front, you know, to be sent to the Russian front, which was a horrible thing too. People were dying there. But he survived and came back. But I personally saw that it happened. You know, there are people now that say that didn't happen. That's not true. It did happen. After the war, my parents took my sister and I to a place that's called Dachau. Do you want to know how that's spelled? Do you know how that's spelled? Dachau, Dachau. And that was a big concentration camp. And the Americans, the soldiers, had opened it up for the people to see what a horrible thing our people had done. And German people would walk through it. And my parents took me and my sister through it. And they had these, the ovens, you know, when after they were dead, they would shove it in there and, what do you call that?
Burn the bodies?
Yeah.
Cremate them?
Cremate them, yes. And the mass graves where they just would throw them in. And we knew then for sure that that had happened, you know. But like I said, people will not understand when there is a government like that, the fear that people have, you know, to say anything, if they did know anything, you know, for fear they and their family would end up in there too. Because it wasn't only Jews. It was political people that said anything about the governor. You know, we say a joke about Obama, you know. You couldn't do that. You couldn't say jokes about Hitler. I mean, there were people in there just for things like that. Gays, by the dozen, you know. Nobody would dare say I'm gay, you know. That was totally against Hitler's belief. And you were asking me about were there different laws. It used to be that a woman could have a job and the man. My mother had a beauty shop. Well, when Hitler came on, only one person in the family could have a job. If my father had a job, my mother couldn't have it. So my mother got out of the beauty shop business. I mean, things like that, you know. And that was to make sure every family, someone had a job. You know, I don't know, you know, it all sounds very good, you know, but it's an infringement on your freedom, you know. and that's just what it was.
Was it harder to live off of just one income than?
No, my daddy did pretty well. We didn't have a problem with it. No. But a lot of people did, you know.
Did you ever hear anything from those people that did have the trouble, what they would go through?
You mean the people that ended up in the concentration camp?
No, ma'am. When they had only one income coming in?
Oh, no, we, you know, I don't mean to be bragging, but we lived in an area, all around us were miners, coal miners. And of course they all had jobs and they all got paid well. And my daddy had a nice position, so we didn't hear about anybody suffering with that, you know. But I'm sure some people probably did, you know. Of course, then life was much easier. Everything was cheaper, you know.
Did prices go up a lot during?
No, not during the war. No, everything was pretty uniform. Like if you got a pound of butter for $2.30 here, you know, you got it for $2.30 up north. You know, they had a controlled prices. You know.
Did you hear anything from like the media? You said that you had a radio channel. Did you ever hear anything about?
The only channel you could get, which you weren't supposed to, and then you had to, you know, really work the knobs. You know, was those little
like the old radios.
Yeah, the oval radio, and my daddy would work them and get BBC, but you didn't know what was going on the outside. You didn't. It was all government controlled.
Did German media say anything about?
No, well, only good. Nothing bad. You know.
Did Hitler come on the radio and say anything to anybody?
No. Goebbels, there was a Dr. Goebbels, and he was the propaganda minister, and he was on a lot. And towards the end, you know, they were working on the atomic bomb. You know, Brown that came over here, Mr. Brown, who came to America, he was working for the Germans then. And Goebbels was telling us there was a special bomb being made for the Germans to hang in there, not to give up, you know, that we would win the war. And fortunately, God didn't allow that, or they would have used it. They would have used it.
So you didn't know anything about anything during the war except for the air
No,
raids?
we only knew, you know, like they would report what the German soldiers, they went to this, you know, city and they conquered this city, you know, stuff like that, you know, just like I think you had newsreels in the movies here, you know, about your army, what they were doing, and that's what we had, you know.
How is America so different than Germany? Not like after the war. How is America so different?
Well, you know, when I came to America, I couldn't believe the freedom we had, that we could move around like we did, you know. I mean, Fred and I, within America, we moved around a lot, you know, when he got a job in the army here or there. And there was never a problem. We didn't have to go anywhere and tell anybody we were moving. No, I have to correct that. When I came, I was still a German at the time. I hadn't had my citizenship. And every January, I had to go to the post office and fill out a form. And the American government knew at any time where I was, and my dad. And I thought that was great. I mean, that was good, you know, instead of everybody coming in like they're doing now, you know. I didn't object to that, but then I got my citizenship and that stopped. I didn't have to do that anymore.
How long did it take you to get your citizenship?
I was here maybe 2 years when I got my citizenship. Yeah. And what really, when I came, I landed in New York. My father and I landed in New York. And I could not believe all the advertisement. We don't have advertisement like you have here.
At all? Like?
I mean, not that fancy. They do now, I'm sure. I haven't been over there since I came here, so I don't know what's going on there now. But the advertisement, I was looking out of the car and all these lights and all, you know. that really. And then I was a little bit disappointed at the cleanliness. You know, Germany is very, very clean. And my husband took me when, I think the Sunday after I got to Washington D.C., he took me to a zoo in Washington D.C. And the trash cans were running over. There was trash everywhere, and I couldn't understand that, you know. But I thought America was and is great.
What did you think of the zoo when you first came there? Did you ever go to a zoo in Germany?
Yeah, we had zoos.
What was the differences between those two zoos?
Not much. Just like I said, the German people are extremely clean. You know, they're forever cleaning. And that's what kind of disappointed me in the DC zoo. But otherwise, there's not much difference in that.
Did you have zebras?
Yes, we had all those. Yeah, we had in well, that doesn't really fit in here, but we have an island it's called Bodensee. It's a sea, it's a lake, big lake, and there's an island in there, and they can grow oranges, all these tropical fruits, because the what's it called in the air was warm.
Humidity?
No.
The climate?
Yeah,
Yeah, you know, was coming through there. That was interesting.
What did you have to do to get your citizenship?
I had to learn everything about the Constitution and everything. I had a big book, you know, I had to learn everything, which was wonderful, you know, because when you come here, you know, what little we learned in the schools, you know, you forget that, but you had to learn all that. And then I had to go to before a court, you know, they have the court, and then there were many, it wasn't just me, there were many people there to be sworn in. It was exciting.
Did Germany have public schools?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they had public school, of course, universities, you know. We have middle school, which is comparatively to what you are in now. It's not like your middle school here.
High school?
It's not high school. It's a preparatory school for college. That's what it is.
So did you go through the whole school system?
Well, I got as far as through middle school, and then the war ruined all that. And then we went down to the south of Germany, and we ended up in this little village. They only had one classroom, kindergarten through 8th grade. So I ended up in there, and the teacher let me teach the little kindergarten and first graders, because I was advanced, you know, and I was past 8th grade. And then when we moved to the city, I went to a business school and got a business degree.
I thought of something a while ago. When did you learn English?
In school. Now over there in Germany, when you went to middle school, you had to learn French and English. And that was before the war.
Did
you had to learn the two, because then French was the world language. It wasn't English, it was French. So you had to learn French and English.
Did you already know German from?
German. I was born there.
So, but you knew the language.
Oh, of course.
You were brought up and you just had to learn those other two.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't even speak Spanish. So you had to study a book and learn about the Constitution and learn about, I guess, our systems, like the way that stuff works here, and study all of our laws.
Yes.
So what freedom surprised you the most? Like we had that you didn't?
Well, like your Constitution, you know, that's a wonderful thing, and I hope that nobody touches that. I mean, it has survived all these years and has been good. That's what makes America. That we have I believe that firmly, that we have the Constitution and abide by it, because the other countries all have whatever regime is in. It's there their way of doing things. It's nothing, you know, from way back or that lasts, you know. That fascinates me, and I find that wonderful. I want to tell you a little bit about Germany. Germany had a war in 1914-18, which they also lost. I'm sure you have heard that in school.
We call that World War I.
That was World War I. And of course they had suffered then. And from that they went into a depression where the money has no value. Like if a pound of bread was $30 now, by the time you got there it might have been $150. And the money had just absolutely no value. And that was a time when Hitler came on and promised, first of all, that Germany would be treated with dignity again in the world, and that all this would stop. And that's how everybody
loved him.
You know, just loved him like everybody loves Obama. You know. And they loved Hitler. Yeah. And they voted him in. They sure did. And then, of course, it worked for a while with Hitler, and everything went well. Everybody had a job, and people were doing well. And then, of course, they started doing that with the Jews. And the good Lord, fortunately, didn't allow that.
Were there any signs, like, before it actually started happening, that Hitler was going to, like, take over everything and that Jews were going to be killed?
No, hopes were high because, see, like my parents, they went through the First World War, through the Depression. Of course, I didn't. And they were ready for something, you know, good. And that's what they saw in him, you know, somebody that would do something good. There was no sign of that. I'm sure they wouldn't have voted him in, you know, if they had known.
How was it like when the war ended? Like, was there just like a stopping point? Like, you could tell the difference?
We knew the war
did it happen gradually?
You know, you kind of knew that we had lost the war and it was over because they were coming in from each side, the Russians from one side, the Americans from the other side, you know, and we knew it would be over. And then when it was finally over, it was a relief. It was a relief. It was 6 years. 6 years of war, no food, bombing, no shelter, you know.
Did you ever sleep at night, like, through the night?
Well, you know, I was a child, of course I would fall asleep, you know. But you slept in your clothes. You didn't take your shoes off. I took my shoes off one night, and when we heard the airplanes, and my mother and father said, let's go, let's go. Yeah, I couldn't find my shoes, you know, and I ran off without shoes, you know. But you just made do. It's amazing what people can do when they have to. It's really amazing.
Did you ever see any of your friends again, like, since you moved and stuff? Did you ever?
No, I didn't. Like I said, after the war, see, there was still a period of time after the war. What money you had, if you had $1, it was worth 10 cents. So the money change came after the war. And there was still, you know, it didn't just immediately, oh, the war's over, we have everything. That didn't happen for a while. And transportation, of course, everything was bombed and down, you know, they had to rebuild. And the Marshall Plan helped us with that. I don't know if they teach that in the schools, but that was a wonderful thing. The Americans did that.
Did you ever go back to the city that you had first lived in?
No,
like
I never did.
Or anything?
No, I never did. I never did. I have not seen it rebuilt, other than on photographs. I never did. That's, of course, I'm rather old now, but if I ever would go there, that's what I'd like to do. Go to my hometown, I call it, you know.
I really did have something. We can edit that. I really did have something, and it was good. What about your family? Like, Did you ever see like your family? Were you ever separated? Like uncles,
well, my
cousins?
father, well, from all the relatives we were separated. And for my father, when he went, they took him in 3 months of war. He was a comical-looking soldier. They didn't have anything then. It was 45. You know, the war was over in 45. And he had like a hat from the Air Force and a jacket from the Army, you know, no rifles. They had no rifles. And he got captured, you know, by the British. Not by the Americans, by the British. And they put him in, they moved him to Belgium in a coal mine. And he had never been in a coal mine. And he was there for 3 years. And we were separated. We were actually separated during the 6 years, and then the 3 years or 9 years. Now during the 6 years, I think he came 2 or twice. But then when there was no transportation, there was no way. See, German people didn't have cars then. Only the business people had cars. And there was no transportation, so he couldn't come, you know, before he was drafted.
So you didn't own a car or anything?
No,
your family?
No, the friends didn't. Bicycle. It was just like China. Lots of bikes.
Could you tell us a little about in Germany before the war started, how your house would look? What was around your house that you could remember?
My house, our house?
Your home in Germany.
Oh, it was very lovely. It didn't belong to us. It belonged to the company. And it was very, very lovely house. You want me to describe it?
A little, please.
You know, you came into the bottom was a big hall, big door, big hall, and then the tile was all black and white. And my mother had laid down red carpet runners, and she had in one corner a what is that called? What is that called? Wicker. She had a wicker set in one side, and the other side she had a big stand with a mirror. They had that in those days, and hooks to put your coat, and a place to put your gloves in, and your umbrella. I don't know. I guess they wouldn't know that, would they? And then the staircase went up this way. And you came upstairs and there was another hallway. And off the hallway was to the left my sister's and my bedroom, my mother's and father's bedroom. And then we had like a music room, had a piano in there, piano. And then to the right was the kitchen, and off the kitchen was the dining room. And the company, each year, my mother could say what she wanted painted in the kitchen. That was an every year thing. The other rooms were every 4 years she could change. You know, they would come and paint it. It was very nice. Had a basement, had a big place on the left with a washing machine, and downstairs. It was all downstairs. It was a lovely home. But we didn't own it, like I said, the company owned it.
Do you remember anything you would do? You said that you had a basement, and I know that some kids back then, they didn't have many things or toys to play with. Did you have anything like a game that you remember playing with your sisters? Any imaginary game that you would play with them?
Well, not so much imaginary. We had very nice toys. I had a beautiful dollhouse, I remember that, and my sister had a little thing that was like a grocery store, and it had a scale, and it had the little packets of stuff in it, and I had the dollhouse, a 2-story dollhouse, and we had very lovely baby dolls and baby buggies, and my father made 2 beautiful baby beds. Mother made the people sewed and knitted and all that in those days a lot. We didn't have TV. She made the stuff to go in the baby bed. So we played a lot with those things. And then we had an outside with swing set and a sandbox and a teeter-totter, you know. So we had, before the war, we had a very nice life.
You did have indoor plumbing, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
Is that when you learned to play the piano?
Yes, yes. And I didn't stick with it because of the war, you know. That's why I play by ear. If I had stayed with it, you know, I would play with music. Yeah, it was very nice. Had a nice garden. My father kept a garden. You know.
Like flower or vegetables?
Nice flower. Where the sandbox and all that was, that he had that real pretty. He built like a gazebo in there, and every Sunday afternoon, Mother would bake a cake. We didn't get cake every day. She baked a cake, and we would have the cake and coffee in the gazebo there, which was nice.
Did you drink coffee when you were?
No coffee.
No coffee.
We had the milk with a big cream on it.
Did you have like Sunday dinner? Did you go to church?
Well, my parents didn't go to church. I hate to say that, but they made us go to church. My sister and I. We would do that. My father thought everybody in church was a hypocrite. And but they made us go to church. My sister and I. Yeah, we went to church every Sunday morning. Sunday school and church. We loved that. Yeah, and dinner. We oftentimes on Sunday afternoon they would take us out to a nice restaurant that had music, you know, and we would go to that. We would take the streetcar to town and go to a nice restaurant. But a lot of times, most of the times, Mother cooked on Sundays.
What was the weather like?
The weather was like in Pennsylvania, you know. Mm-hmm. We had winter and we had 4 seasons, you know. It was the further south you went, which is ironic, the more snow you had. You know, we have the Alps down south, and that's a beautiful part. The Bavaria, it's called, the Bavarian part. It's very lovely. What
was your favorite food?
Mine? Mm-hmm. Well, there is a thing called rolladen, and it's meat rolls. It's a slice of thin sliced beef, and you put a little bit of mustard in it, pickle, bacon, and a little bit of onions, and you roll it up, you brown it, make it gravy. That was my favorite meat.
Did you have Christmas presents like we do now?
Oh, we had a beautiful Christmas. We had, of course, our Christmas tree didn't get up until Christmas Eve. But my father he played the piano, he put a little bell on there, and on Christmas morning, we didn't wrap our gifts. Our gifts were laid in the dining room on the big table, you know, without paper or anything. And then we had the plates with nuts and things, you know. And then Christmas morning, we had to stay in bed which wasn't long, until the little bell rang, and that was the Christ child. That was my dad, you know, but it was the Christ child. And then he would sit down and he would play, there's a German Christmas song, All Children Come. And he would play that song, and then we would know, we could come in, go into the dining room. You know, we say the Christ child comes for Christmas. Santa Claus is I believe it's in November 25th or 24th or something. And that's how we knew then it was Christmas scene.
Did you have a big dinner, like a big Christmas dinner, like, you know?
Well, it was always just our family, you know. In Germany you don't socialize as much. We didn't then. I don't know what they do now. You had your relatives in now and then, but like for Christmas it was just the 4 of us, you know, having dinner. But it was always a nice big dinner.
What about for like your birthdays? Did you get presents then?
Yeah,
or did you celebrate
we had and we can invite our friends. Of course, in those days you had one friend, you know, and that was usually a friend for life. And we had a little wooden circle with holes in it, and you put the candles in, whatever your birthday was. Yeah, and then you would get gifts, you know.
Did you get a cake?
Oh yes, Mother made a cake, yes.
What was your favorite?
I like chocolate cake, I still do. Yeah.
Did you get a lot of like candy then? Did they?
No, we didn't. It was really a treat. Candy was a treat. We didn't get, not that we couldn't have afforded it, but it just, we didn't get that. Or like potato chips or snacks like that. On Saturday evening, my mother would make the apples in a dough thing, like that was our treat for Saturday evening, and Sunday the cake. And now when aunts or uncle came, they would give us, a coin. And there was a kiosk. You know what a kiosk is?
Isn't it like a shop maybe?
It's a little freestanding thing. They sell, candy and soft drinks and moon pies and stuff like that.
Moon pies. And
they would give us a coin and let us go to the kiosk and buy a little something.
What
no, that wasn't. And we, when we found money, whether it was a nickel or a dime, we brought that home. That was expected to be brought home, not just go and buy yourself something. We
like
just
bring it home and give it to your parents, or just bring it home?
Yeah, just bring it home. Tell your parents you found it, And if they thought, you could have it, you could have it,
What did you drink? Did you drink like water or milk or
milk?
Soda?
We drank a lot of milk, yeah. As children, we didn't have soft drinks like we have here. Go back there and get yourself a soft drink, We did not have that.
Like, I don't want to sound mean, but did you have obesity? Like, I know.
No, I've never thought about that. But we didn't have obesity over there, did we?
What?
Obesity.
No.
No. In Bavaria they have a lot of doughy foods. They had a little bit more weight than we did. But no, they didn't have much. We didn't have obesity.
Yeah, and you had to like walk or ride a bicycle to go places.
Yeah, to school, anywhere. To go shopping. You had your bike and you had those, they were like nets. Have you seen them? They're like nets, not like this, They were just, and then when they put stuff in, they sort of expanded. You would hang that on your bike and you'd go to the grocery store or to the butcher and shop on your bike. Or, if it was further, like if you wanted to go to town, we lived on the outskirts of town, then you took the streetcar, which I loved riding the streetcar.
Was it exciting because it was like a moving vehicle?
Yeah, and you sat in there and you could see just the stores and everything go by. It was very relaxing.
Was it bumpy, like the ride?
Not too bad. No, not too bad. They're electric, they run on help me out.
Like a railroad, but it's different. It's one thing.
Yeah.
It's that.
Like the trolley goes on.
Yeah, like the trolleys.
Did you go to school 5 days a week or 6 days?
Five.
Or
5 days a week. Yeah.
From like 8 o'clock.
But it was very concentrated. See, we didn't have all these nice goody things. We got one break. To go out and play. And
what about lunch?
Went out. Well, yeah, we got lunch. Yeah.
Were like the teachers really harsh and stuff, or were they like
no?
Laid back
They weren't harsh. There was so much respect, Amber, that is so missing now here. You respected your teacher. That was your teacher, and you respected older people. Like, if you were sitting in one of the trolleys and it was crowded and another person came in that was older than you got up and offered them your seat. There was just so much respect in those days. And then in return, they respected the children, we don't have that anymore, We don't have that anymore. How many people in high school respect their teacher, Like our buddies, they were our teachers,
Did you have male and female teachers, or just male?
No, we had male and we had more female teachers than males.
What subjects did you have, like math?
The
literature?
same you have here, yeah. History, and then we had English and French when we got a little older. And the same you have here.
School, did you just go home? You didn't stay after and play with anybody? You just
No, you went home. You went home, did your homework.
How much homework did you have?
Not too bad. Not something you couldn't handle, you know. It was just the way of life. You went home, did your homework, no matter what, you know. And then you went to play.
Did you stay at home by yourself, or were like your parents there?
No, there was always somebody, either my father or my mother.
So, like nobody stayed home by themselves,
no,
or like as kids.
No.
Was your sister younger or older than you?
Older. She was 5 years older. Yeah, she was 5 years older.
What did you do with her? Like, did you ever go shopping with her, or?
Well, no. See, by the time the war started, I was 9 and she was 14. So when she got old enough to go shopping, the war was on. There was no shopping. Later on, she lived. Her husband also was in the army, and they lived in Fayetteville, and we lived kind of close together. We got to enjoy each other. But as far as going shopping, or when you have 6 years of war, there's not much to do.
Did you ever go like out to eat, like at a restaurant, like we do now?
Yeah, but not during the week. Not so much during the week. When we would go out, like I said, my parents would take us to a nice restaurant where they had the violence, in the old days, and I guess they were trying to teach us some culture.
How many times did you go grocery shopping? Did you like go get all of your groceries?
Yeah, once a week. My mother had a plan. Monday morning was laundry. Tuesday she would take that laundry. There was a place where they ironed it. They had these big things in those days. They don't even have that anymore. And she would take it there and it would get all ironed. Wednesday, she had one sister. And while I was little, my sister was already in school. She would take me to the city. My aunt lived in the city. And they would meet in a big...
square? Like
no, what is that called? Like those big shopping things we had. Oh, they had a restaurant upstairs, and downstairs they had clothing and everything. You know what I'm saying?
Kind of like a mall.
It wasn't a mall. It was just freestanding stores in those days, and they would meet. So everything was pretty much scheduled, And while she had the beauty shop, on Saturday she would go to the beauty shop. That was in those days. That was the big day where the money was. Everybody's getting their hair done, and she would go and get the money that the beautician had taken in, and that was the week, Everything was so wonderfully organized, And but we didn't go out. No, that's the only time. Wednesdays, she and her sister would meet and have lunch somewhere.
Did you take lunch to school with you, or did you have a cafeteria where you could?
No, we didn't have cafeterias. We had in the basement a place for the indigent children that didn't have anything. They could get food down there, but we took our own lunch. We didn't have a cafeteria. In those days, my goodness, you're talking, 70, 80 years ago? 70? 75 maybe?
Did you have evenings with your parents? Did they come home for dinner? Or?
Well, my mother was home, and my father would, when he would come home. And what we would do in those days, like I said, we never sat in front of a TV, didn't have one. My father would play piano, or he had on the kitchen table, he had that zither thing, and he would play. Mother would be knitting or crocheting, or they did that kind of thing. And my sister did a lot of that because she was older than I, and I would play or color or something, But it wasn't just sitting and watching TV and not having any conversation or anything,
I thought of something when I asked that. Forgot all that stuff around.
My sister was alive then. She wanted to go back to school, and we had to take the high school. They wouldn't accept our high school diploma from Germany.
So did you have to go to like a college and get your?
Yeah, we had to go.
We had to
go to. Was it Maryland College or something? Where was it there on Post where we went? I don't know.
That was part of Fayetteville Technical.
Okay. We had to take a test, to get the high school diploma, And of course, neither one of us had been in school for years. And when we got out of there, we laughed. We said, well, we're going to owe them points. But by golly, we both passed beautiful and got it. And from there, I went. She didn't do it. She was going to go with me to Fayetteville Technical. She didn't do it, so I went into dental hygiene. I talked to the counselor there, I said, I want to do something. He said, what are you good at? I said, I'm good with my hands. He says, well, we're just starting a dental hygiene class. It was the first dental hygiene class. And he says, would you like to be in that? I said, yeah, that'll be fun. And I did that. And got my dental hygiene degree.
And so you went to work for dentists as a dental hygienist?
In Fayetteville, I worked for a dentist in Dr. Murphy, wonderful guy.
St. Paul.
In St. Paul, a little town outside of Fayetteville. And then we came here and we got into the restaurant business and all that stuff, and I wasn't active. Excuse me. Then I worked here in Lenore. I started out with Dr. Holshaw, wasn't it? Holshaw, and then I back into the restaurant business. Then I worked for Dr. Griffin. Yeah. And I graduated. I retired from Dr. Hedrick. Lovely man, just a lovely man. I'm so sad he's so sick. Yeah, I retired from dental hygiene.
So what do you do now? Anything?
Not a thing.
Not
That's
a
not
thing?
being recorded, is it? Is it really?
I can edit it out, I promise. Like I'm going to have to edit out just go.
You're still raising your kids and your grandkids.
Well, yeah,
And great-grandbabies.
my grandchildren are grown. The great-grand, I don't see them that much. They're busy with their grandparents, But Fred and I enjoy life. We go places and, try to do things for people, for our family, and try to help people. But in general, we don't work, other than in the home.
Is there anything that you like to do now that you're basically retired?
Well, I often think I'd like to do something to help somebody, But, there are days at this age when you just don't feel like doing much,
We feel like we need help.
Yeah, right. And I think, well, then I will have, like volunteer work. Then I have told them I'm coming, and I feel so bad myself. But I miss that I can't do anything for people. And if I were younger, I'd go back into the restaurant business. I love that.
Is there anything that you would like people like us, our generation, to know? Like anything?
Well, I want you to know life is short. If you have any plans, pursue them. And be respectful of your parents, of your elders. They know what they're talking about. They have lived life. I would like the young people to know that, and to do what you would like to do and do it well. Do it well.
Okay, are we done?
Would you have anything that you might have, possibly from Germany or from when you first came here to America, that you might want to share, something very possibly sentimental to you, or possibly something that you can remember, like an object possibly that you still have?
When I came over here?
Or something from Germany?
Well, I have some things like that clock up there. that, Fred and I have been married, 57 years? And my sister gave me that clock as my wedding gift. And that's a sentimental item to me.
It
But-
still works.
Pardon?
And it still works.
Yes. But I put no sentiment on things. When you've been in a war and you lost it all very suddenly, then you lose that. A lot of people say, "Oh, I love that." I don't love anything. If my daughter-in-laws come in and say, "Oh, I like that," well, my granddaughter Ashley's boyfriend, they were sitting there having lunch, and I had a thing hanging there, which was a deer head with antlers, and it had bells on it, and that was from Germany. And he sat there and he says, "I really like that." I says, "Do you?" "Yeah, I really do." Well, when they went out, I packed it up and gave it to Ash. I said, "Give that to him tonight." I have no attachment to things. I love life, and I have an attachment to health. I wish the whole family would stay healthy, But that's it. I have no real, that, like I said, that clock, because my sister gave me that for my wedding, But the things that I have had, I have given that all to my daughter-in-laws. I have. I do tell them, I just gave Lynn, my daughter-in-law, an oak table I used to have in there, and that was my mother's oak table. And she wanted to have it. I said, "Well, take it, honey." And she took that, But I don't have no attachment to things like that. I think when you go through a war and you lose that all, that means nothing to you, It's not sad, but that's how it is. Or cars or anything, people say, "I love my car, love my car." Love my car, I enjoyed it.
We have enjoyed it.
Thank you for doing this with us, taking an hour of your life.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
We're
I'm
very
super
thankful.